This is BoomerLife on AlzheimerB.C.
Welcome back. This is BoomerLife. I'm Joanne Sutton, and today we're talking about dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And I'm joined in studio with Alzheimer's Society BC CEO Maria Howard. Maria, can you explain a little bit about what actually is dementia and how we can reduce the risk?
Dementia is an umbrella term for neurological changes, and Alzheimer's disease is just one of those types of diseases that sits under that dementia umbrella. We know from people who suffer from various types of related dementias, Alzheimer's is the most prevalent. I think about 2/3 of all dementias, of people with dementia tend to have Alzheimer's disease.
And dementia is actually progressive.
Dementia is, not all dementias are progressive, but Alzheimer's disease is progressive. And unfortunately, staying in a very a blunt way, it is a terminal disease, which is very hard for people to process that all when they receive a diagnosis. And we do know that sometimes because of the way a diagnosis actually comes about, it's not a simple test that you take. It's a series of conversations with your physician and a series of tests that eventually lands on a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And so sometimes people miss a lot of the information that is being shared with them, which is normal to all of us when we're talking about our personal health and the changes in our life. And so often people don't hear that it is a terminal illness, and that is a hard thing to talk about, but it's an important thing to talk about because it is really important when that type of a reality is there for someone to get as much information and support as early as possible to make the best decisions going forward.
So when you say it's not just a simple test, is it a little bit like a process of elimination?
Absolutely. We know that many of the symptoms that someone might show who we might think are Alzheimer's could be coming from a lot of other types of diseases, and many of them are absolutely treatable. Urinary tract infections is a very good example. Diabetes is a very good example. Sometimes people are taking multiple medications to treat other ailments, and those medications aren't beginning to react properly.
Or they affect their cognitive abilities, right?
Absolutely. And so it's really important for an individual and their family and their physician to sort of walk through the series of questions and assessments to almost a process of elimination before they come to perhaps eventual diagnosis of Alzheimer's.
So this is all what's involved with getting that timely diagnosis.
Absolutely. And I know that, you often hear people say, well, I seem a little more forgetful, or mom seems a little more forgetful. That's a natural part of aging. And so we haven't really been concerned about it. And, I think that's where the myth of Alzheimer's really begins to grow, because there are a lot of normal parts of aging that do affect your cognitive ability, your physical ability, and even sometimes your social ability. But those changes that you would see with someone with Alzheimer's aren't normal, and they aren't attached to aging. Now, we do know that as people live older, your chances of getting Alzheimer's do increase.
Because we're living longer.
We're living longer, and so many other factors are implying. So yes, as you reach your 80s and into your 90s, that percentage, that chance of getting Alzheimer's is increasing. But it's not a given. We also know that, genetics does play a factor, and there are some families who do carry that genetic path. And so those individuals may be experiencing that and know that from the history of grandparents or their parents. And we also know that women do tend to have a higher risk for Alzheimer's. We're not sure why.
Really?
The theme for the Alzheimer's month in Canada this year was the 72%. And we know that 72% of people people diagnosed with Alzheimer's are women.
Are actually women.
Are women.
That stat came out in January this year, didn't it?
Yes, January is National Alzheimer's Month in Canada.
So can we talk a little bit about, is there any actual prevention for Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia? Is there anything that we can actually do in our lives that might change the course of this disease?
Well, research hasn't highlighted any shiny object that shows that if we do X, then we can prevent this. But certainly research has begun to show some very strong evidence about things that we can do that may, delay the onset of Alzheimer's or change the impact. A really big one, no surprise, is physical exercise activity. We know that people who exercise, 3 to 5 times a week, 30 minutes of sort of moderate cardiovascular exercise, do seem to have some benefits.
Is that just simply because it's increasing blood flow or oxygen to the brain, or
most likely,
motor skills, or
yeah, there probably is a whole combination. But what we typically know, what is good for your heart is good for your head, and so really people who are out physically being active do tend to see some delaying of onset. We also know that brain games, however you want to package that, whether that's Scrabble or Sudoku, do
crosswords and
absolutely
reading,
keep your brain engaged. And research has also highlighted that the brain doesn't stop developing. The brain doesn't stop growing. It can continue to regenerate and actually be quite productive even as we are aging. So brain games are a good way.
What about diet?
Absolutely. Again, managing your weight, and that links back to managing other disease states that could be falsely mimicking Alzheimer's symptoms, such as diabetes. We know also that social interaction is really important too. People are social beings, and it's really important to continue to engage in your community, however that means, whatever that means for you, whether that's in playing chess or going for a walk or joining a swim club or even just a book club, or not just a book club, but
visiting with your neighbor.
Absolutely.
Just some type of social interaction.
That is really important.
Not sitting at home alone, not just being one-on-one with the computer, actually talking to somebody more than just the mailman.
Right. Getting out, getting engaged, having a purpose, being a part of something bigger than just yourself. It's really important around community. One thing we do know that is really important, and it goes to the myth, Alzheimer's is typically tagged to people who are older, to the older lifestyle, but this is something that we all need to pay attention. And so one really important thing is to wear a helmet. So whether your kids are on their scooter, on their bikes, snowboarding, skiing, put the helmet on.
So there could be a link, sorry to interrupt it, there could be a link to head injury.
There certainly is a lot of research being done right now about head injury and head trauma and how that impacts Alzheimer's. The research is still fairly young, but there does seem to be some type of correlation. And so, it's also just intuitive. Protect your brain. We wear, elbow pads and knee pads when we go out. We should be wearing a helmet too on our head.
For every outdoor physical activity. And start the kids young, obviously.
Absolutely. Right.
Hockey, football, snowboarding.
Soccer.
All of that fun. Any other myths that you want to talk about right now? Any other myths or misinformation that we might have as a general member of the community that, little red flags we should be aware of? Or
I think one of the big myths is that people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's begin to have a lot of unusual behaviors in terms of memory loss or violent outbursts or wandering, and they become sort of an individual that becomes quite disconnected, and yes, sometimes in advanced stages that is real, but lots of people who have a diagnosis with Alzheimer's are still very productive community members, still have lots to contribute, and are still managing with great family support and caregiving support. So what we have really learned about Alzheimer's is it's not one size that fits all. Everybody has their unique experience, and so the real benefit of getting information early through the Alzheimer's Society of BC, through your physician, through other healthcare professionals, making decisions with your family when you're able to do that is so critical, so that quality of life continues to be something that is achievable.
Okay. How are we for time? Okay. So we can just wrap that up. there was something else we were wanting to talk about in that break, which we haven't done yet. And
I know, I was thinking about that too, but
it just escaped me, and I didn't want to distract you.
No, that's okay.
But I thought, just carry on with your thought. You'll finish that thought. And I thought if I could
myth?
find it, we did. Yeah, I just asked about the myths, though.
Yeah, I'm just trying. What was it?
People that get it, who gets it? We talked about that.
We talked about the fact that many other diseases can mimic, so we talked about that.
I think you covered it. So I just wanted to make sure that we did cover it. Misconceptions online. No.
Oh, I know. Well, we were going to sort of talk about trying to weave a couple stories in. So let me just think quickly. What could you ask me as a question that I could weave a story into?
Because we were talking about myths, or so is there a story about I don't know.
Mom, Jake had no idea he was doing the things that he was doing. He was being controlled by Helena. You, out of everyone.
I just remember earlier
that... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I wanted to pipe up over here.
Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Earlier, Maria was telling a driving story, and I know you touched on driving already, so perhaps that could be something that could be bridged to.
I'm not knowing how to weave that one in at this particular stage.
So we just finished up in talking about...
We're talking about more about diagnosis, and as opposed to that was already an established.
Could there be something around the importance of early diagnosis? And
yeah. That's it. Thank you, Christine.
So maybe ask a question about when you should go see your doctor or something like that.
Because in the last. The last bit that you were talking about, it sparked on my memory about, okay, we're talking about older people, even though you touched earlier saying it's not always just older people, but we sort of focused on the older people. And so I wanted to try to find a way to bring it back to that early onset or younger. Are there any... I'm just trying to think, what could I ask? Are there any, I didn't want to say statistics, but...
one thing that occurs to me is that Maria was just talking a little bit about how it can be a really hard diagnosis to hear, maybe the impacts, how it transforms people's lives. The example of the 17-year-old that she mentioned earlier, whose mom, it doesn't only transform the life of the person who has the disease, but for their family as well.
Yes,
maybe.
Which is also extremely important. Okay, so, and this is just, one sec. I've just messed it all up.
Does it make sense to ask a question such as, so at what point should someone go talk to their doctor or something like that? Or is that too choppy?
Can we just listen back to the last little thing that she said? Yeah. And also because my thought process is now disjointed, having done Julie's section first, right? Sorry, I'll come around. People, and so I wanted to try to find a way to bring it back to that early onset or onset.
Occurs to me is that Maria was just talking a little bit about how it can be a really hard diagnosis to
delete.
One size that fits all. Everybody has their unique experience, and so again the real benefit of getting information early through the Alzheimer's Society of BC, through your physician, through other healthcare professionals, making decisions with your family when you're able to do that is so critical, so that quality of life continues to be something that is achievable.
Period. Okay. One sec. So once you have that diagnosis, once a family has that diagnosis, what's the next step? But we only have about a minute and a half.
That's okay, because that's a perfect That's a perfect segue into, because we're going to do these two sections, then it'll be Julia, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what the society does, which then I'll lead off with the things we do. So that might have a little bit of a natural.
Yeah. What's the next step? And then what I can't find is the actual, my little reset. When we return from the break, we'll answer how to get some direct help from Alzheimer's Society BC, and you can always get more information. Yeah, okay. Okay. We're all good. So, Maria, once a family has that diagnosis, what's the next step?
The Alzheimer's Society of BC would encourage people at that point to become connected through our society through First Link. And First Link is an early intervention resource for people who have received a diagnosis and their family and their caregivers to begin to receive the information and education that hopefully will help them begin to make decisions and begin to become better aware of what's going to happen in the preceding days.
So it'll start with a phone call to you. Would they receive that information from their doctor as well?
The hope is that the person would be referred directly from their physician. If that in fact does not happen, the person can phone directly to our First Link hotline or go to our website, and they will then be contacted by one of our support workers who will begin to
start
talk with
the
them
process.
and start the process.
Yeah.
First Link is offered throughout the province of BC, so it doesn't matter whether you live in Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond,
Victoria,
Dawson Creek,
Port
Valemount.
Hardy, yeah.
It is available to all British Columbians.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. You're listening to Boomer Life on CL 650. I'm Joanne Sutton and joined in studio with Alzheimer's Society BC CEO Maria Howard. And coming up in the next break, Dr. Julie Robillard. We've covered a lot of ground today. I know there's more to come. And when we return from the break, we will be able to answer more questions you have about how to get some direct help from Alzheimer's Society BC. You can always go to their website, AlzheimerBC.org. We'll be right back.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.